was told to tell you with no manuscript.
Yeah.
For the first time, which I hear is the only faithful way to preach the Bible.
Whatever.
You know, anything without faith is anything without faith is sin. You know,
That's
so
true.
I don't want to sin while I'm up here.
Good word.
All right, so I will begin with prayer before getting into it. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you that even in a lab setting, you work just as powerfully through your word as anywhere else. And so while this may be a test of sorts, may we nonetheless be aware of your presence, and may you work in us the reason you inspired this text originally. May we leave changed because your word is life-changing. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Have you ever feared becoming the next Mark Driscoll? Of your gifts opening doors for you that your character should have closed. And all of a sudden, you're a pastor now. And you have a church, a building, a budget, a staff. Most of all, you have a vision, which of course is God's vision for your church, maybe even your neighborhood, your city, and the world. And then what happens when your weak, sinful sheep get in the way of that vision? And all of a sudden, there's a trail of dead bodies behind the bus of your church. How do we not be that leader? Is there anything in the Word that would help us from not being that leader? Well, praise be to God. Mark Driscoll isn't the first murderous leader in the world's existence. By murderous, I mean with his tongue. Let me correct this for the viewers at home. that long line of murderous leaders began in Genesis 3 with Satan and tracked through time to where the original audience of our text today would be well acquainted. Israel would know a long line of murderous leaders that led them to fall from glory and into exile. And so this text we're about to read would be very meaningful to them. How do we not get those kind of leaders? How do we get safe leaders? And with that question in mind, how do we be those safe leaders? Let us read 1 Samuel 22. David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. And he became commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men. And David went from there to Mizpeh of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and my mother stay with you, till I know what God will do for me." And he left them with the king of Moab. And they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet of Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. Now Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in hand, and all his servants were standing about him. And Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, that all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me, or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait as at this day." Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, "I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Then the king sent to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house. The priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. And Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." And Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as at this day?" Then Ahimelech answered the king, "And who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, and captain over your bodyguard, and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little." And the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." And the king said to the guard who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David." And they knew that he fled, and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, "You turn and strike the priests." And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests. And he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword, both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, and sheep, he put to the sword. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, "I knew on that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, 'I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping.'" The title of my sermon is "The Difference Between a Safe Leader and a Psycho." How do we be a safe leader and not a psycho? Clearly this passage contrasts David as the safe leader and Saul as the psycho. And so we see a safe leader in the first scene in our passage, verses 1 to 5. And David begins, he's on the run. He's running from the king of Israel, maybe one of the most powerful people in the region. And what happens? The guy on the run is attracting followers in verses 1 and 2. All of David's brothers and all his father's house. Here he's hiding in a cave, and they go to him. And also everyone who is in distress, and everyone who is in debt, and everyone who has been bitter in soul, gathered to him. He became commander over them, and there were with him about 400 men. David, though he's in danger, is magnetic. Clearly these distressed, suffering people see him not Saul, as a safe leader. This is in contrast to Saul, who earlier in the book, when he sees a strong man or a valiant man, he attaches himself to them. Saul is after recruiting the dream team of warriors, whereas David is welcoming all those who are living a nightmare. David is the safe leader. Let us consider our circle of friends. Let us even consider the people who draw near to us before and after church. Have we gathered around us a bunch of theological eggheads who look exactly like us and are strong in spiritual gifting or intellect or personality? And let's be real, those people are often easier to relate to. I can benefit from the spiritually strong person. I can be fascinated by the strong intellectual person who is a CEO somewhere at my church. But do the members of your church who are in distress, do they think you're safe? Or do they expect if they were to stroll up to you and express their distress, you would quickly wave it off with a theological truism? Fret not, brother. God is in control of your suffering and is making you stronger. Are people who are bitter in soul, do they feel safe around you? Or would they expect you to quickly rebuke them for their bitterness without hearing their whole side of the story? Do people in debt in our church feel welcome around us? Is there anyone at our church in debt? Or do we not know how to relate to those people? I think all of us wants to be the warm and welcoming leader that David is, drawing not merely gifted people, but weak people to him. And you see kind of the heart of David that would attract these people. Even though he's on the run, he's watching out for others, which is why in verse 3, he's going to a different nation to look for cover, special cover, for his elderly mother and father. He goes to the king, "Please let my father and my mother stay with you, till I know what God will do for me." What's the difference between safe leaders and psychos? The first hint we get is in that last phrase, "till I know what God will do for me." And how will David know what God will do for him? It's in that next verse. David listens. He listens to God, specifically through God's prophet. The prophet of Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. You may have not picked this up in our first read-through, because I assume most of y'all are city slickers. But caves are safer than forests. Caves have coverage on every side. All you got to do is guard the opening. Trees do not provide such surround sound coverage. And so, if you're hiding in a cave, you've ended up gathering 400 warriors to yourself who are submitting themselves to your command. If a king's trying to kill me, I'd want to stay in the cave. And yet, the prophet of Gad tells David, do not remain in the stronghold. Go to the forest. But David doesn't object. He listens. He goes where the prophet of God tells him. Now, So what's the difference between safe leaders and psychos in this text? I think the main point that the author is trying to argue is this. Safe leaders listen. Safe leaders listen to God and those who are listening to God. Now that may not seem incredibly loud and obvious in this first scene, but it gets incredibly obvious in the next scene when this safe leader we see in verses 1 to 5 is then contrasted with the psycho in the next scene. And so, again, David is on the run. He's now hiding in a forest, and that's contrasted with the psycho Saul, who is not on the run. He is sitting at Gibeah, his home turf, under the tamarisk tree, which is just a big tree. And so you have Saul, who's not hiding behind this tree like David would have. He's probably sitting under it in the shade. When I like to sit under trees in the shade, I like to hold a nice Sinclair Ferguson book. Saul was not in that kind of mood. Instead, he's holding a spear, even though he's the one who's safe and he's the one who's chilling. But he has a spear. He has a spear because he's a psycho. He's not listening to himself, and as it's about to become clear, he's listening to someone else. Saul is listening to the conspiracy theorist in his head. And yet he commands the servants around him to listen. They're commanded to listen to that conspiracy theorist too in verse 7. He says, "Hear now, people of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds?" Oh, skim down to my favorite part. "None of you is sorry for me, or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait as to this day." That has to be one of the funniest lines in the entire Bible. None of you is sorry for me. Put that on a Simeon Trust coffee cup. None of you is sorry for me. And the reason this is so funny is because we never feel sorry for ourselves like Saul does, right? We never have entire arguments in our heads with people who are enemies but have not actually acted against us in any way. We never come up with conspiracy theories in our heads of things that haven't actually happened. Or do we? Maybe I'm just more crazy than y'all, but I wonder how many wasted hours I've spent over my small ministry career having Saul-like thoughts instead of praying without ceasing or meditating on the Word day and night. And so I think the silliness of Saul's thoughts and what he's expressing should point out our own silliness when we begin to think such self-pitying thoughts. When that happens, remember, do not listen to the psycho. Listen to that word that you've implanted in your heart from the Lord. Meditate on that, because that's where the truth is. And that's what's going to make you a safe leader. Now, psychos, though when they express their psychoness, most people won't listen to them. Praise the Lord. But there will always be that one guy. So don't let that one guy who agrees with all your complaints in ministry validate it as truth. And we see that's exactly what happens in verse 9 as Saul looks out for someone to feel sorry for him, Doeg the Edomite answers. Why there's an Edomite in Saul's camp in the first place, I do not know, because the Edomites were Esau's people, not God's people. And earlier in the book, Saul's actually fighting these people. So how Doeg the Edomite ends up, he's mentioned earlier in the book, as the chief's herdsman of Saul's people, and that's bad. And yet here he is, listening to Saul and giving him what he wants. He said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. Surround yourself with people who listen to God and don't listen to the foolishness coming out of your mouth. Because if you do, or if you don't, this next part of the passage will happen. Saul tracks down this priest and says to him, Hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here am I, my lord. And Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait, as to this day? Now that phrase in verse 13 has showed up for a second time. Inquired of God. You may have passed over it the first time, but clearly the author's beginning to hammer it home, to have it this close to one another. And look, Saul is mad that a priest is inquiring of God for David. Why would you be mad about someone seeking the Lord? Because you're psycho. Saul has completely lost his wits, and this is what the author wants to see, is the huge difference between Saul and David. David listens to God. Saul doesn't. Safe leaders listen to God. Psychos don't. Psychos don't listen to anyone, even voices of reason like Ahimelech's in verse 14. And who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard, and honored in your house? And here it is again. Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? No. David stays listening, because safe leaders stay listening to God, inquiring of the Lord. Ahimelech continues, Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little. And he's telling the truth. And yet, Saul says, Nonetheless, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. And what are the consequences of, we've laughed quite a bit in this sermon, and I think we've been given reason to laugh. But being a psycho in ministry is no laughing matter, as we see what Saul does. Saul commands these priests to be struck down, and Doeg, once again, is that guy. Doeg listens, and in verse 18, he turns and strikes down the priests, and he kills on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. Saul is the king of Israel, the king of God's people, is killing God's priests. And then this last phrase in verse 19, both man and woman, child and infant, ox and donkey and sheep, he put to the sword. This is the havoc the bloodshed that can come from Christian leaders not listening to God. This is a scene so graphic, we might not want children in the sanctuary to hear this. And yet, how much more gruesome is the consequence of our poor leadership if we become self-centered psychos like Saul in ministry. There will not only be bloodshed, there will be eternities lost. Because we don't listen to God. Other people may not listen to God. Because we're saying we speak for God. And so they'll believe us and want nothing to do with that God. A crazy part of all this is, I don't know if you noticed that phrase, the priest who's killed, Ahimelech, they keep referring to him as the son of Ahitub. Why would they keep calling him that? Well, that Ahitub guy is the brother of Issachar, who is the son of Phinehas, who is the son of Eli the prophet, who God promised and cursed because Eli would not listen to the Lord, that there would be no old man in his house. So though this city is wiped out because of Saul's sin, it is also Eli's not listening to the Lord that also led to this. And in Saul's psychoness, he does in this chapter what he was commanded to do several chapters ago to the Amalekites. The Lord told him to put to death every one of the Amalekites, but he wouldn't do it in fear of the people. He listened to their voice over the Lord's voice. But he cares more about listening to the conspiracy theorist in his head than he cares about listening to God here. Now, if there's a little bit of Saul in all of us, a little bit of psycho in all of us, how do we be the safe leader instead of the psycho? We get that answer in scene 3 of our passage, where we've seen a safe leader, we've seen a psycho, but we get to learn a safe leader's safety in scene 3. This Abiathar runs to David, tells David that what Saul did, and this is David's response. I knew on that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Did you, David? David takes responsibility for the massacre that just happened, even though it was clearly Saul not listening to the Lord and clearly Eli not listening to the Lord. Clearly those are the ones who have a primary responsibility. But David is such a safe leader that he's even willing to see the sliver of what he could have done to prevent this. Tip in ministry: if a scandal strikes your church and you don't have primary ethical responsibility, you don't need to cover up. You can take the little responsibility you have. And what would allow a leader to do that? I think we see the answer in verse 23. David, even though he's on the run, tells Abiathar, stay with me. do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. Now, if I was Abiathar, I would be like, are you sure? Why should I not be afraid again if he who seeks your life seeks my life? Shouldn't I run from you? Because being close to you puts me in harm's way. And yet David ends this passage with saying, with me you shall be in safe keeping. What do we make of this? David's safety clearly isn't in himself, isn't in a cave. It is in the God who he keeps inquiring of. David's safety is in the Lord. And so he can be confident that though Saul seeks his life, he is safe. And so is everyone else who would draw near to him.
You're done.
I'm done?
Yep.
Okay.
In 10 seconds, tell us where this thing would have gone.
I was going to ask, wouldn't you love to have a king like David?
Yeah.
Because in ministry, we will be the ones who are distressed, in debt, and bitter in soul. We have a greater David in Jesus who says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you
Oh,
rest.
that would have been good.
Yeah, that gospel connection is he has all these people, and these are the same people Jesus brought to him.
And then I was going to say this dope thing about...
So you need another 10 minutes.
David's still on the run. But we have a king who's no longer on the run. He is seated, upholding the universe by the word of his power.
That would have been good.
And so,
That's close.
what I need a cave when I got a God. You know what I'm saying?
All right.
Safe leaders
I would have
listen.
kept listening.
So would have I, which we'll get up to the positive aspects of this sermon.
Can I grab my phone to take notes on
Yes, you can.
the ripping to shreds?
No, I don't know if that's coming.
Yeah.
Oh boy. All right, David, what encouraged you as you wrote this bad boy? Studied this passage.
I mean, I could go on. I think the first thing that comes to mind is such a passage that clearly would not be a high point in 1 Samuel, not famous at all, and yet I think it's just so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The contrast between David and Saul, and then I think just an encouragement for me as the leader to find my safety in listening to the Lord.
Okay.
Man, like from the moment you asked that first question, have I ever feared becoming the next Mark Driscoll? I was like, yep. And was drawn by like just encouraged by this whole thing of just like how to not end up that way. And seeing like, yeah, I'm a lot like Saul. I was encouraged, like convicted really, but just like encouraged to not be like that.
I was encouraged that a text that if I had preached, I probably would have just wept over, that you encouraged us with it. And so thank you for that. And just realizing and knowing that, that the focus of the text still points us to something greater.
Well, I appreciate the fact you equated Mark Driscoll and not me with Satan. I was like, really? That's hilarious. No, I was encouraged just, or I guess just challenged just to make sure to keep doing personal inventory, because I definitely am a psycho.
The thing that encouraged me most was the fact that you freaking went for it. So you were terrified to go no notes, and you just went for it. And we're like, I'm just gonna preach this text. I thought it was great. So, okay, now having done it, maybe it was in the preaching, maybe it was in the prep or whatever, you're like, oof, I don't know if I made it on this point. Especially, we're going to go with just in the preaching, because it was a no notes thing. So, what area of weakness did you feel in the actual act of preaching this thing?
I felt like I had the moves down between the points. I felt like I didn't have the moves down within the points. And so I've actually never preached with the Bible in front of me before.
What?
Because I've only preached with a manuscript.
Oh, okay.
And so I've never had the thing of like looking down, finding my place, and then like knowing where in the passage
That's
to
telling.
point to in the
Okay.
narrative.
All right.
So that was
All right.
obviously I stumbled a lot.
All right.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that sometimes within the points I got a little lost, but like I saw where you were tracking, and I just got a little lost sometimes. But you did a lot better than the time I tried. No,
What's the nuance of the question I'm answering?
What could he have improved? What did you do
Yeah.
that wasn't so great?
Yeah, there was sometimes a contrast between you were leading with a statement about safe,
Right.
or you leading with a statement about psychotic, and just I think if you had notes in front of you, it would have been more clear as you hit that. But yeah, that could have been a little cleaner.
Does that make sense? You don't talk about safe leaders when you're talking about the psycho.
Even though that's my main point, I shouldn't.
Right. Because you're going to come back to it in the third point.
Okay.
In this story, you started there, you're going to come back there. When you're in that middle point about the psycho, just lean into the psycho. And just tell us, this is not a safe leader. Right? That kind of thing. Like, this is the destructive leader. Instead of, now a safe leader doesn't do this stuff. You're going to tell us what the safe leader does. You already told us what the safe leader did. Just focus on what the bad leader does.
Oh, this is kind of funny actually. When you started off, you said, "How do we be a safe leader and not a psycho?" And I wrote next to it, "You look like a psycho." Not a psycho.
Right.
It's hilarious. I was like, yeah. But anyways,
So
I
your
was like,
expression-
I'm getting ready to listen to a psycho. No, anyways, I think in this passage, yeah, that's a freebie.
So you were talking about my expressions?
Yeah, you were
Okay.
psycho, and I was like,
Particularly at the beginning.
in the
Okay.
beginning, yeah.
Weird
anyhow,
facial expressions. Okay, it's gonna be great on video. Weird.
I don't know how do I put this. I think like maybe Jerry was touching on Milo, like you have safe leader, unsafe leader, but like that whole point of like the depths of depravity that jealousy of another person or leadership can lead somebody, like really just like. Does that make sense?
Press into that application.
Yeah, how it is instead of
Which you would have done if you hadn't kept pivoting to good leader,
Yeah.
right, or safe leader.
I think these like that was the opportunity in that sentence just to hammer that part, like where this leads you.
Yep.
More so than restating they got killed and these ones died. You've just been like, look how far it will go and then upward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so particularly to this, your verbal tics came out, that's inevitable when you go no notes. So the word about 4,000 times, and the other one is the word now. You're like, now! That's kind of just your, look, I need one more second to figure out where I am. So this goes back to I agree that when you're inside the points, I don't think it was a train wreck at all. But you were stumbling around like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? So just keep in mind the next step, even inside that book. Because you had like multiple things you wanted to say about Saul being a psycho. Just have those things clear in your mind and how they relate to one another, and you'll be way clearer in this.
Yeah, I think with like the pacing of it, I think a lot of us have the issue of talking too fast. Sometimes you're going really slow, which is helpful. Like I said, I mean, I could have listened for 35 minutes, but I think within that pacing, like there was a lot of me, and now I'm seeing what it was. Like, it was you kept talking about the safe part. You couldn't have been talking about the psycho, and like not having that would have cut down
Oh yeah,
the time.
big time.
And so you could have had like more pointedness in those points, and it would have trimmed down the time and still been just as effective, if not more.
There were two instances. The first, I think you got on a rabbit trail that you couldn't get off of in regards to potentially throwing dirt in your elder's face of like that they're the bad guys. And I just didn't. Maybe you were going there, but I wanted to be careful for you to not say it's bad to have good friends and it's good to have bad friends. It was
At
almost
the
like-
beginning.
It was in your second point, yeah. And I just felt like you were kind of heading down that road, and it felt like you were trying to be careful, and that just to me that was like being off of notes.
Do you remember the verse associated with that?
David has a magnetic
That
personality.
was the first point.
Yeah, in my manuscript, I had a clarification like, pastors need to raise up leaders, and so I forgot to clarify that, but yeah, that's a good caution.
Back kind of in that same time frame of that, you made a mention when you're juxtaposing who David had with him and then Saul attaching himself to like good soldiers. You stated it as a negative thing. That was actually a smart thing for that guy.
Saul?
Yeah, I mean, you attaching yourself to great people. The same thing David did when he became a king, right? When he was able to, right? So like,
Yeah, you only
nuance.
refer to as the misfits that are with him, but he also has a whole chapter about the mighty men who joined him in that process. So.
yeah.
So the idea of which you kind of got to, which was helpful in that little thing, is that like David is magnetic. All we learned about Saul, the only thing Saul is doing is attaching himself. So if you make that contrast, right, that would have landed more.
Which I think started that.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
started there.
Started,
was
but
the
then
good
it went
point.
the other
Yep.
way.
So this is 100% in line with the fact that you don't usually preach from the Bible. From a Bible.
Sounds so bad.
From A.
You got to tell us where you're at in the text. We've got Bibles. You've got a Bible. It's right there in verse 17. It's right there, and you're especially because you're looking at it. Just tell us where you're at in the story. You can do that artistically. He says this. Where's that? It's right there in verse 12. And we just look at verse 13. So, along with that, don't read nearly as much as you were. Now it makes sense because you're like, okay, these are words on a page. I'm comfortable with words on a page. Do a lot more summarizing and only hit the key verses, right? So retell the story in your own words and then point to the key things in the text. And the reason I'm telling you that is because you better freaking keep preaching like this. Because now we're going to the positives. What was a unique benefit that you felt in the preaching of this as a result of Glowing No Notes? Sure, there's all kinds of challenges, but now you got the good stuff.
I mean, the constant anxiety of finding my place as I look up and then look down at the paper, that was eliminated, so I didn't have to.
Okay.
Although that was replaced with finding my place in the Bible, so.
All right.
Great.
Backwards. Start with you, Sam.
Yeah, I appreciated. So on this, I appreciated the fact in your delivery this time as opposed to the other time. You were definitely way more connected with who you're talking to.
Oh, yes.
Does that make sense? Like,
1,000 times.
yeah, you're like, okay, you're speaking to me. We're talking. I'm getting this. Or before it's when, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, and the
Good
positive, I was afraid to take notes because you were so engaging. I was like, I don't want to look, like he's going to see me taking notes and think that I'm not interested in what he's saying, but I was incredibly interested.
Mm-hmm.
You had a couple of passing things that, again, I haven't heard you preach before, but I loved you saying, hey, you may have missed this on the first pass, but, and then you gave it to us. You did that 2 or 3 times.
Good move.
Even if it's your own self saying, I probably missed it the first time, so I'm going to say, I don't know if you noticed, but Eli's grandson has been wiped out. Like just these couple of, like you made it okay that I missed it the first time, and that was super cool to just connect with your audience that way.
Yeah, I like the way that you use words familiar to our culture to describe what was happening in this ancient text. That you didn't just say, "Oh, Saul was a wicked man," but you called him a psycho. And like we get that. Oh yeah, we've seen psychos. Oh shoot, I'm a psycho. And then like conspiracy theorists too, like talking about that. And it's like labeling this thing going on in his head as conspiracy and being like, oh whoa, like, yeah, I do make up conspiracies. And that was just like it just connected really well.
Yep. It was 100% clear. Like that introduction, you're going no notes. Like you were clearly up on a high wire and terrified for those first few minutes, which is why you're smiling when you say psycho or whatever. But by the time we get out of the introduction, the stakes are through the roof, right? There's a lot of risk in this sermon for me, so I gotta listen to this because I don't want to be that. I want to be this other thing. Oh, there's some help for me to not be this person, but the other person. I could be this. Oh, geez, okay. What do you got for me? Like it was engaging from minute one, not just because you said Driscoll, which I don't know if you should do, but like it was clear. Like, oh, geez, okay, here we go, game on. I had to listen to this sermon if I had half a brain. And you paid off on the promise.
Yeah, I think that you going through here not just being like, oh, we should be like David, but then pointing out where we're like Saul, and really pushing into that on numerous occasions, and then highlighting him not listening to God and us was good application. You stuck it in our lap on both ends, the positive way and the negative way.
Yeah, your intro to just ratchet it up, and then that line of the trail of bodies behind the bus, like that. I knew right where your message was going at that point because because I looked at it, like, what is he going to do with all these bodies, in this text? And then I was aware of it, I guess, because it was what I was working on this morning. Every one of your scenes, you had this pivot that Saul is safe under a tree, but he's the one holding a spear. You had all of these buts, the things that would just keep it from. Most people won't listen to a psycho, but there's always one guy. It's just like you just kept. So man, that was good. That was real good, just from a storytelling standpoint. Well done.
Yeah, I think this might be one of the most application-rich sermons I've heard in these rooms. Like definitely one of them where I was writing so much down that wasn't like, oh, this is a positive, this is a negative, but I want to remember this. And so just the applications you had were so good. Most of what I wrote was I want to remember this. What he's saying right now.
Yep. You highlighted to good effect a bunch of the ironies in this text. You've got to leave a cave and go to a forest. I don't know if you city slickers about caves, right? Without making us feel stupid, right? It was just you played it off well, and then he has no reason to think this, but he thinks this. What's an Edomite even doing there, right? A bunch of stuff. You're treating us like you people don't know what Edomites are. So let me teach you. It's just he wasn't supposed to be there. He was warring with them earlier, and now he's got this guy. He's the one he's listening to, even though he's listening to him, and he's pissed at the priest for listening to God and stuff like that. He's like, this is the craziest thing ever. So a lot of those details were super helpful and made the applications hit. Yeah, you better keep doing this. If we go back to the manuscript, I'm gonna slap you.
How much more gruesome is the eternal significance? That line, brother.
Right.